I just found out that CapsWiki went down. Oh, because the server that runs it is right here. Hi, today I am in the office with the server, a rare occurrence because I actually run this thing at home because I use it for editing as well as hosting websites like CapsWiki, my Mastodon instance, and my own personal wiki for things. But primarily it's video editing and other archival storage. Now today, this is getting a huge upgrade because some of it is being offloaded to other hardware, but it's also getting switched over to a fiber network connection for within my house. Unfortunately, I don't have fiber internet there. I'm only talking about local networking for the entirety of this video. I'm going to reiterate that again because as I've been streaming some of this stuff, I keep getting questions about it. Everything I'm talking about with fiber is cables like this that are in my house. So this has nothing to do with internet speeds, just to be clear. Now, for the last weeks, months, I don't know, I've lost track of time because I've been too deep in networking, which I hate. And I have been spending a whole bunch of time getting a MikroTik cloud router switch thing set up with 10 gigabit SFP plus ports on it. And I'm also using an Aruba 2920 network switch there. I actually have 9 of those because I really thought this whole project was going to go a whole lot different. Matter of fact, that MikroTik switch I wasn't planning on buying because I thought I was going to use this, which is an HPE 5920. This is a 24-port SFP plus switch. It has 480 gigabits of switching capacity. That's just bananas numbers. I was really hoping that I could use it with this card, which I'll talk about more in a moment, to do link aggregation for higher bandwidths. But it turns out this thing uses like 400 watts at idle. So it had to go. And that MikroTik uses 17 watts at idle. So bit of a different story. So I've been putting together a bunch of networking hardware, getting it all set up and learning how to use it. Today, I'm going to go over what all I've got set up, how it works, how I'm setting up my new network infrastructure for my home for editing and file transfers and things like that, because this is something I have needed for quite some time, and I'm really looking forward to some definite improvements that I have already been able to tell from my limited testing. Let me start out by telling you what I'm currently using for my network infrastructure at home. This is a dual Xeon E5 2690 server, and it has an Intel X520 T2 network card that I was sent around 2019. Now, I have been running that card for 5 years. It had only existed for 9 years by the time I was sent it, so I've now been using it for more than 50% of the time that it was used in enterprise use. And that's significant because they have some real big downsides. Now, that network card is a 10 gigabit copper network card. And what's significant about that is 10 gigabit copper hardware runs really, really hot. Matter of fact, cooling in this machine for those network cards has been an unending nightmare that even after the most recent rebuild of this machine, I still had to go back and come up with a different cooling solution. Let me show you how that's set up right now. This server has unfortunately been the jank server at every possible step. It's just been like that. This is a piece of cardboard from a Slim Jim box. I forgot that's where that came from. Used to direct air from a blower motor that I have resting on top of the RAM by the CPU so that it can blow air over the X520 card, which is hiding down in there. This was required because I could not cool any of these cards in any other way. I needed just gobs of airflow going over this hardware. Now, a lot of you have said in many of the videos where I talked about modifying server hardware to have quieter fans in them, that some cards are designed to have way more airflow. But the thing is, these cards can also be used in just a regular workstation, a normal desktop computer that can be much lower airflow. They have an active cooling fan on them that's supposed to handle this, but that active cooling fan is terrible. And I've tried to remedy this before in a video, And all of my solutions for that have held up somewhat over time, but never have lasted for long. So this is like the third one of these cards that I've had in here. They haven't all failed. It's just I've gone through different iterations of cooling. And finally, I said, screw it. And I just stuck a 1 amp, 12 volt fan right behind the card and said, that'll have to do for now. But not any longer. With this upgrade, I finally get to stop using 10 gigabit copper, which has been a really big improvement over 1 gig, of course, but it's never been that great. Oh yeah, by the way, that's not the original cooler that's meant to be on here. I replaced that because the one with the fan on it has just like no heat sinking capacity. But what is replacing it is a Mellanox X-Connect 3, and this is more specifically a CX354A. This is a dual QSFP Plus network card, which means these are two 40 gigabit per second ports. Sort of. It's meant to be InfiniBand, and I don't actually know what that really is. Okay, here's the thing. I'm a Linux user. I've used Linux in a lot of videos, but that's because I'm a software developer by trade. Not because I'm a network admin or system administrator or know anything about servers. So I'm gonna just lay out here that I both very much dislike networking because it seems like just the middle manager of the computer industry, and I also don't know a whole lot about it and have a high resistance to learning as much as I can about it because it's just something that's going to go in one ear and out the other because I don't care. So I don't know what a VLAN can do. I don't know how to do like a lot of like a VLAN. That's like the one thing I know actually to even call out. I don't like networking. Now I said my network infrastructure was going to be 10 gigabit and that's not 10. Well, this is a little bit of an oddball thing that some of the keen-eyed viewers amongst you actually noticed when I was originally sent the gigabyte server that this will be getting paired alongside. 2 of these cards were provided to me by Dogface, who sent the server as well. One with a low profile card that is currently in the gigabyte server, and this full height one, which I will be putting in this machine. Now, the benefit to this is that I'm going to be able to adapt down the QSFP Plus connector to SFP Plus to get 10 gigabit off of this card. But I also have a QSFP DAC cable that I can connect between the 2 servers directly, set a static IP, and have a 40 gigabit per second link between the servers themselves. Something of which I just can't support with switches due to the power consumption or the expensive modern hardware that probably uses less power. Now, I'm also going to be adding an NVMe storage drive to this. That should give it something that it can actually interface with the other hardware with at a more serious speed. So we'll hopefully be able to get some fast data transfers going today. I just got to shuffle some things around. All right. And now, hopefully, I don't need this stupid fan solution in here anymore. And I think that means this machine is now ready to be introduced into the rack, and we can start actually looking at all of the new hardware. All right, now before I put that server in this rack, I'm going to first state that the office is just an absolute disaster because getting all of this hardware here together and tested has been just all I've been doing over the last few weeks, and moving this rack out of the storage room has orphaned a lot of stuff out of where it was. So after I'm done with this project, I get to go on an office reorganizing spree again. But for now, let's go over what is in this rack. So this is a 25U, I believe, Shark rack that I bought, I don't even know how many years ago now. There's a video that talks about it, and that video actually also has a Quanta switch that had a set of 10 gigabit SFP Plus connectors. I didn't even remember I had. That thing died shortly after the video, so it didn't really matter anyway. But I've had this forever, but since I moved into the office, I haven't been able to use it because I don't host anything here because the internet is terrible. So I run all of my server hardware at home, but until recently, I haven't had a reason to bring the rack home because I only ran a rack before because I wanted somewhere to keep the server, and I had a console working, but the console stopped working, or so I thought it did. Turned out my 24-port VGA Belkin KVM stopped working. The console works fine, but it's also got other issues. I'm going to switch to hopefully a 1 GPU console at some point in the future. I don't have one yet, so I'm on the lookout. But yeah, that's an upgrade I'm looking to make to this thing. But anyway, for now, we're going to put that server in this rack. And as I do that and get everything connected, I'll go through everything that we have here. To start, though, I'm going to work smarter, not harder. This is a material lift, also known as a hand forklift. What this is a platform that has a ratcheting winch that allows you to move a platform up and down. And that makes it extremely easy to put a server into a rack like this by yourself. I bought this so that I could work on some other hardware at some point in the future a little more easily by myself, but I haven't had that many opportunities to use it because, well, that other hardware is a whole lot more difficult to get going. Now, the reason I'm using this today, because I can lift the server and I'm just going to put it directly onto this platform, is that it makes it way easier to position the rails correctly so you don't accidentally jam them while you're trying to hand hold the server. And yeah, I don't want to ruin the rails. I actually spent some time before I got everything set up here today re-lubricating these so that they are nice and smooth once again. I am really happy with how those turned out. So I'm looking forward to this thing being a lot easier to maintain. But for now, let's get it in there. All right, it's in. I'm really glad I lubricated those rails because they're still not super happy, but yeah, that's a lot better than that was before. But there we go. That is the server added. Yeah, this one doesn't have any retention functionality to that. So what I'm gonna have to do is get a couple of screws and just screw the server in because yeah, it doesn't have any latches. This Gigabyte server has these finger tightenable screws here that you can use to pull it out, but nothing like that for the Xeon. Now, as I am fastening this thing in here in a somewhat permanent fashion, I will reiterate, this is not getting run at the office. I'm only doing this for demonstration purposes. I'm going to be disassembling this whole thing again today, and pulling it all out of here, taking it down a flight of stairs. It's going to suck. I've got a long day ahead of me. That's why this is going to be a not necessarily multi-part, but multi-day filmed video. Now that everything is in here, let me go over what all is here. So first off, I have a Keystone panel, just average run-of-the-mill one. In it, I have 6 cables already run going to the 1 gigabit switch I'll talk more about in a second. Over here, I have 2 HDMI Keystones. Only one of them is actually connected to something because in this, I run an HDMI ED-ID dummy plug. This just presents as a monitor, unfortunately a 4K monitor because KDE does some weird stuff, but I leave that plugged in there because I have a KVM way in the back. Actually, this KVM, a 2-port IO gear, I have a 4-port of the exact same model that I may switch into here someday if I ever have any more hardware. I don't really plan on running a whole bunch of stuff, so 2 ports going to be enough for now. But that KVM will read the ED-ID on this and send it to both machines, so I only need the 1 plug. And then when I want to actually interface with it, I can just unplug this, put it into the dummy slot, plug in my next dock right here, and then being delivered today is actually a USB Keystone slot that I'll be putting in here to run to the mouse and keyboard inputs. Now, over here I have an unfortunate decision. This is one of 2 things I did not consider when laying this out. So first off, some of you are going to be saying network stuff should go on the back. Well, where this is going in my house, that's not going to really work because I won't be able to get to the back too easily just due to how everything is laid out where this is going. So I wanted everything in the front as much as possible. So here it is in the front, but I needed DAC cables to go from the switch to the dedicated hardware in the rack. I'm only using fiber when I leave the rack, but I wanted these to run to the back of everything, which there aren't DAC Keystone panels, so they just go through some holes. Yeah, oh well. But it was always going to be like that anyway, as we talk about this, but we'll get to that in a second. What is doing the SFP Plus 10 gigabit switching is a MikroTik CR309. It's got a bunch of stuff over there that basically tells you it's got 8 SFP Plus ports and one 1 gigabit Ethernet port that maybe works over PoE. This is actually a PoE switch. Maybe I could boot it over that. I don't think I ever have a reason to, so, you know, whatever. But also it has just a regular 9-pin console port here, which is really awesome. I did have to use that a little bit, but not too much. Under that is an Aruba 2920 48 port PoE switch, like I mentioned. Now I have all of these connected here. Only, I think 3 of them are actually being used at the moment. But I ran some extras and I have the cables bunched up in the back just to be ready in advance, so I don't like add some to the rack and then go, oh no, I have to make a cable. Bam, already done. And yeah, I probably could have just bought, you know, pass-through connector ones, then bought Ethernet cables to run through the back. But I wanted to do it the old-fashioned way. So this thing is one of 9 of these that I own, because a bunch of them showed up at Goodwill, of all places. And I thought these were going to be the solution for another problem that I'm looking to solve with my network layout. But they're fairly loud, and I really don't need 48 ports everywhere. So I bought some other fanless ones that we'll take a look at later. But in the rack, this makes perfect sense because I need to be able to connect to a bunch of random nonsense. Like if you want to SSH into a machine like this, you're better off using the 1 gigabit port just in case there's something weird going on with your fancy 40 gig card. It's definitely given me some issues. So yeah, definitely going to be leaving 1 gig stuff in here for management. But yeah. So that's what that is. And this is also one of the reasons why the DAC pass-through was going to happen kind of no matter what. Because this switch actually has an SFP Plus port in a module on the back. And if I had both of these on the back of the rack, I still would have had to pass one of these through because all the ports for this are on the front and then the port on this is in the back. So no matter what, this was going to happen, so I don't feel too bad about it, at least. So that's how I'm doing the 1 gig switching. The MikroTik is for 10 gig fiber only, and then this is just for in-the-rack random management stuff. Then we have this. This is the Gigabyte R272Z32 server that we've looked at a couple of times on the channel now, and then the server we just popped in there. Now, something to note real quick here. This is a 2.5-inch SATA dock on this machine, and this is how I import all of my footage, or at least it has been so far. I'm probably going to be editing off a file stored on this machine now, and I've been trying to think, do I want to pop the drives in here, and then import them over the network card onto this machine? But then this has to be on to do that, because I haven't decided if I'm going to let this idle down or not. I'd actually be curious what people think about the idea, because it would mean that I would be turning off the hard drives constantly, maybe once a week or something. It would have to spin them up or something. I don't know. I haven't decided that yet, because it's my understanding that just letting them spin is probably better than spinning them down and then spinning them back up. Either way, this has an alternative solution, because I was looking at the platform layout for this server, and it turned out the USB ports on EPYC machines actually go directly to the CPU. So using USB SATA adapters doesn't take up any bandwidth of anything else, especially on the front port, which go directly to the CPU. So yeah, I'm just probably gonna do that, at least sometimes. So that's all set. Now let's go around to the back. We'll talk about all this stuff in a little bit, because there's more exterior to this, but most of that is only relevant once I take it all home. Oh, wait, actually, we're not done down here yet. I forgot. This is a 1500 watt APC UPS, which will be super handy to have in here. I'm extremely excited that it's rack mount. I've only ever had the, random desktop ones. Only one problem. There's no batteries, so I'm gonna have to fix it. They actually leaked and corroded, so much for S in the SLA, but having to repopulate the battery tray in a UPS to get what is going to be a free UPS to me, not too bad. But it does work for right now, and I have another UPS that the server's already using at home, so I'll just I'll bypass this for now until I get batteries, and then run everything off of that. But eventually, I get to run everything off of this, which is really nice. We'll take a look at what's going on back there in a moment, because this is what I'm calling the anti-jank setup, and I wanted some nicer options for power, so I kind of overspent on a couple of things. Now, as I spin this rack around, I want to talk about something with how I'm laying this thing out, because it has to do with, well, this. The reason that I'm able to easily spin this around is a philosophy that I'm going to go with on the rack this time. I did not do this last time, but I think this is a better idea. So there are these kind of grommeted protected holes in the top plate of this that you can run cables out of. And I decided every single cable that runs the rack will exit from the top, because that means that it can never run over its own cables. It's empty and open through the bottom. So previously I ran the power cable out through the bottom, but I was constantly running over it. And when you jam the cable on there, yeah, that kind of really sucks up against the wheels. It's terrible to getting it over that. So yeah, everything is running over the top. Also, I'm going to be putting this on top of a piece of OSB wood where it finally goes, so that it's way easier to move around. I did the same thing for the data generals when I put them in the office. Pretty sure I covered that in that video. So yeah, that's happening here as well. So now let's go over everything that's happening back here. All right, so the first thing I'm going to mention is the shelf, which has the KVM on it. This is actually from a future rack-based project that we'll take a look at. Yeah, I have the KVM on a shelf because it's not a rack mount KVM. It is a desk unit. And I needed that to be contained in a nice way because, again, this whole thing is the anti-jank setup. So that's how I am looking at this for now. But everything else in here is mostly fairly well cable managed already. I'm going to have to undo all of it to take it home, but I wanted to make sure the cable lengths and runs and everything would make sense. So yeah, but let's go over everything. So this is the Gigabyte server again. Each server has its own loop of cables, and they come through different sides of the rack. So the Gigabyte cables all come from the right side and are managed all together right here. This is long enough that if I go and release the front, I can push on the server and everything can follow along with it. Now it locked about halfway through. I can release it more to the point where I can actually get to the cables to undo them from the front. Because as I mentioned, once this thing is in place, I am not going to have space to get around to the back of it. So this is my solution for that, a well-managed trunk of cables for everything, all in one bundle. And since we just put this server in there, I still need to do its cabling. So let me just do that really quick. I am going to call out, though, that I was really smart. When I did the cables that go to the keystones there, I labeled them all matching the numbering on the keystone, and I put a little legend on the keystone, just A, in case I ever have a second keystone panel in here. Maybe I put one in the back if it ever becomes easy to get to the back. I can label that one B and then have a B series ones. But anyway, I know that because this cable is labeled A4, it goes to the 4th port up there. Way easier to keep track of this stuff. So yeah, I labeled everything as I was working on it. Now, before I plug in these cables, let me just go through these two, because these are the ones that are going to the QSFP plus 40 gigabit card. One of these is a QSFP to SFP adapter, which just goes into the switch. So one port on that card runs in 10 gigabit and just goes directly to the switch. The other one is the QSFP DAC cable. This is a 6-foot, I think, cable that was actually sent to me by Dogface after I bought a 1.6 foot one that could only reach from here to there. So thank you for that, Dogface. But yeah, that is how I'm going to be direct connecting the two servers together, is using that. And I'm using so many network cables because I'm also connecting to the management port on both of them. And I have one of the 1 gigabit ports connected because that's how I will be remote managing the Linux instances on the machines. Yeah, this is a lot. I've designed all of the infrastructure many times. I have a full diagram for it, but yeah, it's very complicated. Now let me get all of this connected. And that's it for the bottom server. Like I mentioned, all of its cables come in as a bundle from the left side looking from the rear. So it's very easy to keep the two separate. Now, though, I think we're ready to turn everything on, which brings me to the things that I don't necessarily need, but I really wanted down below. Power in racks is such a weirdly difficult and expensive subject. What I have here are 2 rack mount power strips. That's it. That's all they are. Now, they're labeled PDU. They don't do any distribution. They're just power strips, which if you've never looked in one, are just two strips of metal for live and neutral, maybe ground if you're lucky. So yeah, there's not a whole lot going on in there. But I wanted two of these because the UPS I have there has two switchable groups from the management interface that I'm not 100% sure if works or not. I was able to connect to it, but without batteries, it doesn't really want to do a whole lot. Maybe I'll be good, but anyway, with the two switchable groups, it means that I can turn these two sets of power strips off remotely from it. So how I've divvied this up is the bottom one is the actual servers, and the top one is all of the network equipment and random miscellaneous stuff. That way, I can track the power consumption based off of that, which I think will be really cool. But it did mean I had to buy two of them, and even though these are cheap ones, they were still like 30 bucks each. This stuff's just stupidly overpriced. And again, that's cheap for these. Okay, hi. All right, way in the back here, I'm ready to power this thing up, and I'm doing that via an extension cable run to another room because I don't really need it fighting with the lights and other computers here for all of the power from one breaker. Now, because the batteries are not installed and the tray is disconnected, UPS is just gonna beep constantly, so I'm gonna go ahead and turn it off. And this server fired up automatically because I forgot I had it configured that way, so that hit a little harder there. This one I will turn on in a moment after everything settles down. But while this is all booting up, let me talk about how I'm using this stuff, because the 10 gigabit stuff all has to go somewhere, and I have a lot of places where it needs to go. All right, while this is all booting up, which takes forever because it's server hardware, let me talk about these. These are 3 fiber cables that are run in parallel. I probably could have bought cables like this, but instead I spent hours manually hand sleeving them together with a nylon sleeve so that they could be protected, because I can't easily protect those because these are the final run that goes into the rack coming from just a cheap junction box, because the room that this is going into is going to be only used for this, essentially. It's just, there's no people in it, let's just put it that way. So this is going to be in there, and there's not too much danger of the cables getting damaged. So I'm just bundling them together so I can get to this. This will then send the cables off into the rest of the house where I need them. And I'm doing this in a way where I can disconnect stuff, like this trunk of cables will be able to be disconnected from that junction box, and the rack can move anywhere within the room. So I have tried to plan out as much of that. But what do these go to? Well, obviously on this end, they go to the MikroTik switch here. And this is a 10 gigabit per second per port, 80 gigabit switching capacity switch. So that's that. But that's not the only thing, because of course it has to go somewhere. So I have this. This is a QNAP something or another. Oh, it does actually have a model number. What do you know? You wouldn't be able to tell because they just call it QNAP Ethernet switch on Amazon. But this takes in 10 gigabit SFP plus and outputs 2.5 gigabits Ethernet, which is great if you have something like a laptop like I do that can do 2.5 gigs. So I'm really looking forward to trying that out with this in the final setup. I've already tested it. It works phenomenally. We'll look at that later on in the video, but that is what this goes into. And it's not just one of these. It's not just 2 of these. It's actually 3 of these. Now I have these 2 set up here right now. This one is still in here. And this is what ended up replacing the other Arubas that I bought. So it is a very small fanless switch, really simple and great. Now I picked these in particular over anything else because as I've been saying, this is the anti-jank rack setup. I went with the MikroTik because it's a real brand from a real company that makes real products, and the same thing is true for the QNAP. There are a lot of cheap companies, will say, that make things like this that you could get that would not cost as much, but I wanted something from a real vendor, so QNAP is where I went. These are unmanaged, which is fine with me because I don't even know how to manage this stuff. Like I mentioned, what's a VLAN? So this is great for me. Now, one thing, these have a, I'm going to call it a pass-through SFP plus port, but really it's just 2 port. Also, fun fact, these are 60 gigabit per second switching capacity, which is not too far off of the MikroTik. Kind of insane. But what that'll let me do is my desktop, where I do the bulk of my editing, will actually have a pass-through SFP DAC cable that will allow me to get 10 gigabit to my desktop through all of this stuff. So That's one of my goals as well. It'll be 2.5 gig on the laptop, 10 gig on the desktop, because that is the most important run, because that's how I do all of my editing. So I'm really looking forward to that. But I have 2 of these already set up over there. One of them gets internet in from the router, which we won't go into because it doesn't really matter, but it does DHCP for everything, because I don't want to manage like MAC addresses and IP address reservation and all that nonsense that pass. So it's just router DHCP goes into one. I did 2.5 gig on that one when I didn't really need to. I could have just run copper 1 gig because I have just pedestrian internet service at home, unfortunately. But if fiber ever becomes available, oh, I'll be ready. But yeah, that's that. The other one is going to a spot where I use my laptop as a dedicated, like, secondary editing location. I find it really handy to have somewhere to go that's not my main editing den during the day if I need a break. So I do a lot of work on my laptop as well, mostly color correction. It's really nice to have one screen that I do all of that on that's reasonably decent, and that's one of the reasons why I bought that laptop. So yeah, there's a second one of these for that. And those 2 I already have set up here for now. We will get to this one because I have a machine that's going to be a stand-in for my editing desktop here today. But for right now, let's just see what we can get through all the hardware we have here. All right, I had some more stuff I wanted to demonstrate while I had all of the hardware out, but you see all that nice B-roll I've been running of the hardware? So that hasn't actually been filmed yet for me, because my whole plan is to film a kind of rough demonstration of how all of the hardware is going together, and then tear the rack down and film each piece as I take it out so that I can take all of it home. And right as I was going to do a demonstration here of connecting between the 2 machines and stuff, the Aruba switch decided to stop connecting over the 10 gig SFP Plus port on the back for some reason. So I don't know what's going on there. I've been troubleshooting this for over an hour now, and I'm kind of out of time to have enough time to tear the rack down and take it home today. So I'm going to just troubleshoot that some more at home after I get everything set up. I can replace the Aruba. I have another one with 10 gig ports on the back, so that won't be a problem. So worst case, I'm just going to do that. But right now I am fully out of time. So I'm going to start tearing down the rack so that I can take everything home and film all that B-roll that you already saw. Ugh. It's all done and working now, and I even kind of solved that problem with the Aruba, but we'll get to that. So first off, the rack is here at my house where I do my editing, set up and installed, and approved by the cat. So it is all functional now, and everything is working and has been tested. I'm really glad to have all that done because it was a lot of work, especially running all of the fiber, which we'll look at how I did that, because I'm really happy with how that turned out in the end, and thankfully didn't have any real issues with it. Now, first, I do want to talk about what happened with the Aruba there, because I did kind of fix the problem, but not really the way I would have expected. So here is the MikroTik's web management interface, and I am running SwitchOS rather than RouterOS because I don't need all of the features that RouterOS has. SwitchOS is just fine and a lot simpler. But the original plan here was not to have the Aruba connected to this port, it was to have it connected to this one, which is one of the 10 gig ports that would have allowed there to be more upstream bandwidth available for everything on there. Doesn't really matter because it's just for the management ports, but it still would have been nice to be able to have that set up. But what I did instead is I connected the Aruba to the 1 gig Ethernet port on the MikroTik. And the reason I did that is because it turns out the 2 SFP Plus ports on the back of the Aruba don't work with DAC cables. It seems like this thing clears its logs after a while, so I can't show you the error on live, but I do have a screenshot of it where it just says it's straight up not compatible. This was after enabling the allow unsupported transceivers thing, so it just straight up doesn't work with the DAC cables that I have, at least. So wasn't a whole lot I could do about it. But again, that's fine because the 1 gig ports are just for the remote management stuff, and the, like there's a problem with the 10 gig cards or something. It gives me a much more reliable connection to the servers to be able to do troubleshooting. Now, for the actual setup here, it's a lot more than just the rack because I needed to run fiber to everywhere in the house where I'm using the network to edit with the servers. So I actually bought some cable management channeling conduits, possibly. I'm not sure exactly what you call this stuff, but it's these adhesive backed white cable channel things that have a slip-on cover, and the goal was to run the fiber through this along the walls because the house I am in has vaulted ceilings, so it would be impossible for me to run everything through the walls because I wouldn't be able to get up into the ceiling to move it from one wall to the next. But there were some concerns that I had to make sure that I handled with this plan, because the minimum 90-degree bend for the cables is listed on the website at about 7.5 millimeters, which is pretty tight, so I wasn't super concerned about it. The cables I bought were bend-insensitive cables, which I believe means that the fiber optic core in the cable itself has a variable refractive index from the inside to the outside that kind of tries to recurve the light back in. It's weird. I don't fully understand the fiber stuff. But in the end, it wasn't really a problem because, as you can see in this photo, when the cable takes the racing optimal line where it just kisses the apex of the turn, the bend radius is pretty large. So running it through these wasn't an issue. However, there were some difficult turns that the fiber would have to make, which is why I got this stuff. And this is a nylon sleeving that can be opened up and then you can put a cable inside. And I wanted this for both visual reasons and to protect the cable in a couple of areas. But I did a handful of really complicated turns around just parts of the walls and ceilings that I would not have been able to do with these straight pieces using this stuff. And you can't even tell that the fiber is there with it being a bright teal blue. So this stuff was absolutely fantastic for making the routing look a lot better. Now, the other part of the routing was trying to make sure that I didn't screw my future self over by making everything unmaintainable. So I was very fastidious in how I was labeling and managing the cables inside of the junction boxes that I mentioned, which is a good time to bring up the junction boxes that I use because I think I picked out some really weird ones, it turns out. It looks like most junction boxes for fiber are just external connectors that have internal loops that go to another connector so you can just join one side to the other. But I didn't really want to go for that. I wanted something that was a little more self-contained and hidden, and the cheap white ones that I went with kind of made my life hard, at least with the cables that I got from fs.com, because the strain relief was a little longer than I expected, and it limited my options to where I could put the cables inside. In the end, I was able to make it work, and the final mount on the wall looks really good, so I'm very happy with the results, but that part was not easy. But anyway, it took me 2 days to do all the fiber runs everywhere, and I finally got it done, and it was just so relieved. Thankfully, I set up the rack first, so I was able to test every single run as I was doing it by just setting up one of the QNAP switches and plugging it in, making sure I could get a network connection through it. Everything went perfectly fine the first time on all the runs, which I was really happy to not have to troubleshoot anything with. The next thing I needed to do had to do with the desktop that I'm actually recording this on, and that was replacing the Intel X520T2 network card with another Mellanox Connect X3 card, this time a single port SFP Plus card rather than the 40 gigs that are in the servers. And I would just like to take a moment to say that this card that just has a Noctua fan slapped on top of a slightly larger heatsink than stock on the 520T2 was actually the most reliable one. I don't think I ever had to replace this one. So if you are trying to use one of these cards, I kind of recommend just going this route. It makes it more than 1U wide, so it's going to be better suited to a desktop rather than a server, but this was easily the most reliable setup I had for this. But I don't have to worry about that anymore now because I'm going fiber, which is much lower transmission power and does not get as hot. So I'm very, very happy about that. But with that, I think we've covered all of the actual routing and physical side of it. So now we can look at how the setup actually works by looking at the servers. All right, so I have both servers up and running now, and this is the new Epic NVMe server, and this one is the Xeon hard drive server. So I'm kind of delineating them that way, and the Xeon server is always going to be dark theme here, whereas the NVMe server or Epic server is going to be the light mode theme, so it's really easy to tell them apart. Now, one of the things I'm going to call out here is because I loathe networking so much, and I don't want to learn any of the fancy command line tools or stuff, I'm setting up everything in the KDE Network Manager. Now, I do run a GUI on my server, and it's not because I don't want to use the Linux command line tools, although I don't want to use the network command line tools. The reason is because DaVinci Resolve, my video editing software, which runs as a render server, requires an X11 display be somewhere, so I have to have a GUI on there anyway, and the performance difference of a GUI or not on today's hardware is nothing. So yeah, whatever, it makes life easier. But I have 3 network connections on both of these servers. I have the QSFP DAC connection that we'll get to in a second, the 10 gig fiber that connects us to the MikroTik switch, and then the 1 gig copper that connects it to the Aruba as a backup emergency remote management interface. Let me talk about this first, though, because this is the Mellanox Connect X3354, whatever. This is a QSFP DAC, which means it can do 40 gigabits per second. And that is what my link speed is right now. It's not super reliable for some reason, and I'm not exactly sure what the problem is. I was trying to get some help from my supporters on Discord with this, and at best, we think it's maybe the DAC cable isn't great. I actually just got another DAC cable that is a 100 gigabits per second DAC cable. I'm going to try swapping those out, just see if maybe that one's a little more reliable than the 40 gig only one. But yeah, this, at least for now, is working in 40 gig mode, which I'll go ahead and demonstrate by running iPerf here. All right, the server setup on the EPYC side, and over on the Xeon machine, I'm going to run the client here, but I'm going to run it with P2, which means it's going to use 2 parallel processes. But with that running, we'll see a total of 20 gigabits per second. That's weird. Let me try upping the process count here. That helped a little bit. Yeah, so here's the thing. It's kind of difficult to actually get 40 gigs per second out of this. I have gotten this connection up to 37 gigabits per second. There might be some more bandwidth stuff going on, or maybe just through NUMA nonsense, it's not actually running on one of these CPUs that's connected directly to the network card. So I'll get kind of random performance differences. So one benefit to the EPYC server here actually is this machine is a single socket board, which means there is no NUMA nonsense to worry about. Although with the weird chiplet stuff, I don't know quite how that works on there. There might be like internal things, I don't know, servers, and the modern hardware is weird, man. Now the inter-server link is just one aspect of this. There's still the actual 10 gig intranet, and then how it breaks out to the 2.5 gig connections, which laptop's going to take advantage of. So I do want to move on here, but I'll mention that the inter-server link isn't fully defined yet. I am editing this video. I've already started editing this one with all the footage that I shot in the office by mounting all of the footage from the NVMe server on a drive pool that it has to the Xeon server in a way where I can pass through the data, and that's working out really well. The performance is great, but we'll look at that in a moment here. But just for now, I haven't decided how I'm divvying up tasks between the two machines yet, so that is still in flux while I figure everything out and get used to the new network setup, because it is kind of complicated and weird, and I just want to make sure that I don't start down any paths that aren't going to be the right solution in the long run. So still figuring out everything there. Now, though, let's move on to looking at some of the other aspects of the network rebuild, specifically the desktop that I do the majority of my editing on that I'm currently recording this on. So again, this is just a i9-9900KF. That doesn't really matter, but I do want to point out that the 10 gigabit network connection for it is fully functional. So I'm going to do an iPerf test here. Use it as the client, connect to the 10 gig port. This is going to go through the QNAP from one SFP port to the other and then to the MikroTik switch. And I'm going to get 8 gigabits per second, 9 there. That's pretty darn good. I'm quite happy with that solution. Now, this is the one upstream bandwidth limited connection in the whole setup. Everywhere I've tried to be really particular about how I routed everything, because the 10 gigabit fiber connections that break down to the 2.5 gig connections add up to 10 gigs if you add up all the ports. So I tried to kind of keep that in mind. I was really tempted to run parallel to fiber connections into the room where the editing desktop is, but
ultimately I decided that was kind of overkill, since in reality there's not going to be that much other high bandwidth stuff here. But if I'm running stuff on the other 2.5 gig ports in the same room over the same QNAP switch, then I will start to see some congestion on the switch, and it will reduce the effective bandwidth of this connection. Now, that's not too big of a concern overall, because, I mean, I control the hardware here, so that won't really be an issue. But it is something that I'm keeping in mind. Now, to give you an idea of how this setup is going to work in practical terms, I'm going to go ahead and rsync one of the files that I'm recording the screen capture of over to the machine, and you can see just banana speeds I'm able to achieve here. 600 megabytes per second. That was not megabits per second. That was megabytes. That was 4.8 gigabits per second of write speed there. That's insane. So yeah, having the network capability to back this up, really nice. And yeah, there's some spicy stuff going on that NVMe server that I'll talk about in a future video. I'm really excited about that. Now, I'm really happy with this setup for other dumber reasons, because it's not only just fast, it's also the first time I've ever had DHCP on the 10 gig port. Now, that doesn't matter because, again, my internet speed is not that fast and it's not fiber to the home, but every setup I've had with the X520s has been a static IP over twisted pair. So the cable, one end was plugged into one card, the other end was plugged into another card. And I've never been able to just route traffic over that without having to do like weird nonsense with bridging and all that kind of stuff, which I did not want to do because that would require learning how to do networking. So this is just fantastic, because while I do have the 1 gig port on this machine still connected, it allows me to have a much better managed setup for this stuff. And it's really nice to not have one of my network connections be really weird. And if I lose the other one, then, you know, that stops working with internet and stuff. It's so nice to just have it be normal. Now for the final test showing DaVinci Resolve, I'm actually going to do it using my laptop, because I want to show you how the 2.5 gig connection works on this, because it is ridiculous. Now, this is not where this machine is going to be used in the long run. There is another QNAP switch that this is going to be plugged into to give it a dedicated 2.5 gig connection. Not in this room. Again, I like to have another space that I can go to and edit once I'm tired of being in here, staring at the same displays in the same spot. Just helps to get up and move around. So first off here, I will demonstrate. Bam! 2.5 gigabits per second there. Very nice to see on that for the first time ever after owning this laptop for 3 years. I have been trying to figure out how to do this since I bought this laptop, and at least as early as last year I was looking at switches of how to do this, which is funny because I was looking at the Ethernet only version of the QNAPs that I bought, which is actually $100 more than the ones that I bought. High-speed copper stuff is just absolutely not worth it. But the only way I was ever going to be able to bring the laptop up to a better speed was to completely redo the network, because again, it was just direct copper to copper links with the cards, so there was no switching happening. But anyway, now that the MikroTik exists and I can do switching, I can finally open DaVinci Resolve on here, and now I get some absolutely bananas performance with the playback on here. This is not only raw footage, this is 4K raw footage on a 4K timeline being edited on a laptop. This is ridiculous. Yeah, the performance on this is absolutely insane. Now, to give you an idea of how bad this was before, if I went into the media folder here to try and view the clips and did a Control A, it would actually lag on selecting all of the clips. I think it's because it tries to load a bunch of metadata all at once, but just that action would lag really bad. I no longer have to render proxies for my video editing, which is going to be a massive benefit to this, because I usually have a workflow where I pop in the drives, I copy the files over, I render the proxies, and that proxy render time, it's fast on the server, especially with the better GPUs that I have in there now, but it's slow enough that I can't always start editing on the first day after I shoot at the office. So for this now, I can go directly from the drives and just start editing right away. Yeah, this is just wildly better now. So yeah, I'm extremely happy with this setup. It is crazy how fast this is. I have never seen this level of performance on the laptop without having the files be locally on it. It's fantastic. And of course, if the editing performance is this good over the 2.5 gig length, the 10 gig link is obviously perfect. I mean, I don't see any issues with this, but yeah, the 10 gig link is flawless. But I think that's pretty much it. I kind of want to summarize my thoughts here, though, on the entire process, because I've never really messed with really high bandwidth or high, quality networking equipment like this before. Most of the stuff I've used has just been like cheap, unmanaged Netgear switches. The MikroTik has overall been really nice. I kind of really liked the management interface of Router OS. It's a shame that I have literally no reason to run it. Switch OS just makes way more sense to me. The only problem I've had with that is sometimes it just doesn't recognize new connections when I plug something in. So I'll have to power cycle it, which is not the worst thing if I'm physically there plugging something in, but it's a little annoying and weird. That Aruba, I mean, you're not going to go out and buy one of those. That thing is old. It was just something I found at Goodwill, which is why I have a stack of 9 of them now I'm not going to use. There was going to be one like right here for editing with the desktop, and I was going to use the SFP Plus ports on that to pass through, but yeah, that didn't work out because those things were not as good as I thought. Actually, another thought about the Aruba and the MikroTik. There's going to be an upcoming project that has to do with the server rack and those in particular. The MikroTik is fanless. It just has the giant heatsink on the back. And the Aruba actually blows air sideways through the switch. So it doesn't cycle front to back. What this means, and what we can see with the thermal camera, is that all of the heat from those two pieces of equipment just floats at the top of the rack and never leaves it because heat rises and they're at the top. So it just sits there stewing at like 32 degrees Celsius, which isn't too bad, but I want to try and put some fans in the top of the rack, and I was recently sent a fan controller designed by one of my supporters, and I'm really curious to check it out. So I might make a second channel video about setting up fans in the server rack on the back door of the rack cabinet. I think that would work out really well, just to exhaust all of the heat from the network equipment, and it can even use temperature sensors to monitor what level the fan should be at based on the activity of the heat in there. So that'll be really fun to add and will help increase the longevity of the network equipment, which is, yeah, kind of just running a little hotter than it needs to right now. Let's see, anything else? The QNAPs, I think, are actually fantastic. I would recommend just not buying the cheaper switches of that same product category, the SFP Plus to 2.5 gig ports. Just go for the higher end ones. I don't care if it's the QNAP or the Linksys. I read some really scary things on the reviews of the cheap ones about port compatibility issues with electronics dying. So yeah, that kind of scared me out of it. But also this was the network setup where I wanted everything to just be nice. And I don't know what the switching capacity on the cheaper ones would be. Like I mentioned, the switching capacity on the QNAPs is 60 gigabits per second according to their webpage, which is really high considering there's only like 20 gigabits per second in on the two SFP Plus ports. It's pretty darn good. So yeah, those I think are a great value compared to everything else. The only other thing I think I can mention is avoid the Mellanox Connect X3 card series. They're working fine here, but that was after a lot more effort that I had to put into this setup because I'm running Linux on everything, and NVIDIA stopped updating the Linux drivers for those, maybe just all the drivers, I don't know. I only looked at the Linux stuff, and I had to go back to Ubuntu 20.04.0 to be able to get a kernel version that was compatible with the last release of the drivers that worked with these cards so that I could update the firmware, because when I first connected the two cards together, I was only getting 10 gigabits per second out of one of them in Ethernet mode because, oh yeah, these are actually InfiniBand cards. I'm running them in Ethernet mode. I don't know what InfiniBand stuff is because networking. So yeah, I had to update the firmware on both cards so they were compatible with each other in Ethernet mode, and that was a whole ordeal to do. So yeah, just it's not worth. Don't get those cards. The single port SFP Plus card I put in the desktop, that one worked flawlessly, thankfully, but it's also the least feature packed card, so that kind of makes sense. But yeah, I think that is all. So I am really happy to finally have a good network setup that's just working, and I don't have to worry about overheating cards or weird static IP connections, well, other than the one between the two servers. But worst case, I can always fall back to going over the 10 gigabit switch now and not really have a bad setup. But yeah, this has been a massive improvement. Just wish it didn't take so much work to get it all done. It was so much work. But yeah, that's it. So if you enjoyed this video about my networking nonsense, well, I hopefully never have to do it again because this was the one and done. But if you did, you may want to subscribe to be notified when I release another video. If you want to help support the channel, you can find me on Patreon. But for now, that's it, and I will see you next time.